For 30 years, I pretended to be just a housewife. When my husband died, my daughter-in-law shouted, "Now you're going to work as a maid." I laughed and said, "We'll see." The next day, I revealed my 1.2 billion company. Listen to my story until the end and comment from which city you are watching me. That way I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I am 73 years old. Everything began 31 years ago when I made a decision that would change the course of my entire life, though nobody around me would know it for decades. I was 42 then, married to Thomas Hayes for 18 years, and everyone saw me exactly as I wanted them to see me, the perfect housewife. I baked cookies for church fundraisers, kept an immaculate home, and never missed a single one of my stepson Marcus's soccer games. Thomas had married me when Marcus was just 5, after his first wife died in a car accident. I loved that boy as if he were my own flesh and blood, but his wife Patricia never saw it that way. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Thomas had left for his accounting firm, kissing my cheek and reminding me to pick up his dry cleaning. Marcus, now 23 and fresh out of college, was living with his new wife Patricia in the apartment above our garage. I waved goodbye from the kitchen window, my apron still tied around my waist, and waited exactly 15 minutes before I transformed into someone completely different. I walked to my bedroom, opened the hidden panel behind my vanity mirror, and retrieved my business attire. Within 20 minutes, I had become Eleanor Blackstone, CEO of Blackstone Innovations, a technology consulting firm I had founded using my maiden name and a small inheritance from my grandmother that Thomas never knew existed. The company started modestly. I had always been gifted with numbers and had a natural understanding of emerging technologies. While Thomas spent his evenings watching television, I spent mine in our basement office, which he believed was just my craft room. Behind the sewing machine and yarn baskets was a sophisticated computer setup and filing system that would have impressed any Fortune 500 executive. My first client was a small manufacturing company struggling with inventory management. I developed a software solution that increased their efficiency by 40%. Word spread quietly through professional networks I had carefully cultivated. Within 2 years, Blackstone Innovations was consulting for major corporations, and I was making more money than Thomas ever dreamed of. The hardest part was never the work itself, but maintaining the elaborate facade. I had to be home by 4:30 every afternoon to start dinner. I memorized Thomas's schedule so precisely that I could predict when he would call home. I had a second phone line installed in the basement, telling Thomas it was for my sister Margaret, who lived across the country and liked to call at odd hours. Margaret, bless her soul, became my unwitting accomplice. She never questioned why I sent her checks to deposit in various accounts, or why I asked her to receive mail at her address. She assumed it was related to some small craft business I was running, and I never corrected her assumption. By year 5, Blackstone Innovations had grown beyond anything I had imagined. I had hired a team of brilliant consultants who worked remotely, believing their CEO was a reclusive genius who preferred written communication. I conducted meetings through encrypted video calls from a small office I rented under a false identity, using voice modulation software to disguise my appearance and sound. The irony was exquisite. Thomas would come home complaining about his difficult clients and modest salary, while I had just closed deals worth millions. I would nod sympathetically, offer him a glass of wine, and suggest he relax while I finished preparing dinner. He never noticed that our modest lifestyle was punctuated by small luxuries that his salary could never afford. When he questioned a particularly expensive cut of meat or wine, I would smile and say I had found it on sale. Patricia entered our lives during year 7 of my double existence. She was everything I had never been allowed to be: ambitious, outspoken, and utterly convinced of her own importance. Marcus brought her home for Thanksgiving, and she spent the entire evening making snide comments about my simple lifestyle and suggesting that I should find something meaningful to do with my time. "Eleanor is perfectly content," Thomas had said, patting my hand condescendingly. "Not every woman needs a career to feel fulfilled." Patricia's eyes had gleamed with a particular malice I would come to know well. "Of course, Uncle Thomas. Some people are just naturally suited for domestic life." That night, after they had gone to bed, I closed a deal that would net Blackstone Innovations $12 million over 3 years. The client was a multinational corporation that Patricia's own marketing firm had been desperately trying to land for months. The years that followed were a delicate dance of deception and success. By day, I perfected the art of being invisible, the kind of woman whose contributions were taken for granted. I organized charity events, managed the household finances with what Thomas believed was admirable frugality, and maintained friendships with other wives who seemed content to define themselves solely through their husbands' achievements. By night, I was revolutionizing industries. Blackstone Innovations developed cutting-edge solutions for supply chain management, created revolutionary customer relationship software, and pioneered data analytics tools that became industry standards. I acquired smaller companies, invested in startups, and built a portfolio that would have impressed any venture capitalist. The most challenging moment came during year 15 when Thomas decided we should update our wills. He insisted on involving Patricia, who had recently passed the bar exam and was working at a small legal firm. She pored over our finances with the enthusiasm of a detective, clearly hoping to find evidence of financial troubles that would support her narrative of Thomas being married to a burden. "Your household expenses are remarkably low," she noted, her voice sharp with suspicion. "How do you manage to maintain this lifestyle on Thomas's salary alone?" I had prepared for this moment for years. I produced meticulously forged records showing modest but consistent returns on a small investment portfolio, coupled with my earnings from selling crafts at local markets and online. The amounts were small enough to seem realistic, but steady enough to explain our comfortable lifestyle. "Eleanor has always been remarkably resourceful," Thomas said proudly, completely missing the dangerous glint in Patricia's eyes. But Patricia wasn't satisfied. Over the following months, she began dropping by unexpectedly, clearly hoping to catch me in some inconsistency. She questioned neighbors about my daily routines, checked our mailbox for unusual correspondence, and even had the audacity to search through my craft room while I was at the grocery store. I knew about every intrusion, of course. I had installed a comprehensive security system that Thomas believed was simply for protection against burglaries. But Patricia's searches taught me something important. She was desperately looking for evidence that I was hiding money from Thomas, convinced that I was somehow cheating her future inheritance. The irony was breathtaking. Here she was, searching for thousands of dollars in hidden savings, while I was sitting on a fortune worth hundreds of millions. During year 23, Blackstone Innovations went public through a carefully orchestrated process that maintained my anonymity. I worked with lawyers and financial advisors who believed Eleanor Blackstone was a reclusive billionaire who valued privacy above all else. The IPO raised $800 million, making me one of the wealthiest women in the country, though nobody in my personal life had any idea. Thomas celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary by surprising me with a weekend trip to a modest bed and breakfast 2 hours away. He was so proud of himself for saving up for this extravagant gesture. That same week, I had quietly purchased a small island in the Caribbean through a series of shell companies, though I knew I might never see it. The loneliness was sometimes overwhelming. I had achieved success beyond my wildest dreams, but I couldn't share it with anyone. I attended charity galas as Eleanor Hayes, the supportive wife, writing modest checks that earned polite appreciation. Meanwhile, Eleanor Blackstone was funding entire wings of hospitals and scholarship programs, but always anonymously. Marcus and Patricia had 3 children during these years, twin boys named David and Daniel, and a daughter named Sarah. I loved those children fiercely, spoiling them in small ways that seemed appropriate for a doting step-grandmother on a limited budget. I bought them books and art supplies, took them to museums and parks, and filled their college funds with money that Thomas believed came from careful budgeting and my craft sales. Patricia grew more suspicious and resentful with each passing year. She couldn't understand how we maintained such a comfortable lifestyle, how the children's college funds grew so quickly, or why I seemed so content with my meaningless existence. She began making increasingly cruel comments about my dependence on Thomas and my failure to contribute meaningfully to society. "It must be nice to live such a simple life," she would say with saccharine sweetness. "Not everyone is cut out for real responsibility." I would smile and offer her another cup of tea while mentally reviewing the quarterly reports from the dozen companies I now owned outright. The most dangerous moment came during year 28, when Patricia convinced Marcus to pressure Thomas about our financial planning. She had filled his head with concerns about my ability to support myself if something happened to Thomas, suggesting that I was naive about money and would need significant help managing even basic expenses. Thomas, bless his heart, was genuinely concerned about my welfare. He began explaining basic financial concepts to me as if I were a child, showing me how to balance a checkbook and suggesting that Patricia might help me understand investment principles after his death. "I just want to make sure you'll be comfortable," he said, holding my hands with such genuine love that I felt physically ill about my deception. That night, I made a decision that would prove prophetic. I began liquidating some of my more visible assets and moving money into structures that would be completely invisible to anyone examining Eleanor Hayes's finances. I also started working with estate planners to ensure that my wealth would be properly managed in the event of my death, with provisions that would allow me to reveal the truth if circumstances ever required it. Patricia's cruelty reached new heights during our 30th wedding anniversary celebration. She gave a speech praising Thomas for his generosity in supporting me all these years, and expressed hope that I would find ways to contribute in my golden years. The assembled family and friends nodded appreciatively, completely oblivious to the fact that I could have bought and sold every person in that room. "Perhaps Eleanor could find work as a housekeeper or companion for elderly people," Patricia suggested with mock helpfulness. "She certainly has the experience." The laughter that followed was polite but stinging. I smiled graciously and thanked her for her concern, while mentally calculating that I had earned more money that week than everyone at that party would earn in their entire lives combined. Thomas began showing signs of serious illness during our 31st year together. The doctors were initially optimistic, but I could see the truth in their carefully neutral expressions. I had access to medical consultants that Thomas couldn't imagine, and I knew his prognosis was grave. I faced an impossible choice. I could use my resources to get Thomas the best treatment in the world, but doing so would require revealing my secret. Or I could maintain my facade and watch the man I genuinely loved receive standard care that might not be enough. I chose love over secrecy, but I did it carefully. I arranged for Thomas to be randomly selected for an experimental treatment program that was actually funded by one of my shell companies. I ensured that he received care from the world's best specialists who believed they were participating in a research study funded by an anonymous philanthropist. For 18 months, Thomas fought bravely while receiving treatment that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. I was with him every step of the way, playing the role of the devoted wife while secretly coordinating a medical team that included Nobel Prize winners and pioneering researchers. But money, even unlimited money, cannot cure everything. Thomas passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in spring, holding my hand and thanking me for giving him such a wonderful life. His final words were about how grateful he was that I had been content with our simple existence together. I grieved genuinely and deeply. Despite our relationship being built on a fundamental deception, I had truly loved Thomas. He was a good man who deserved better than the elaborate lie I had constructed around our marriage. But he was also a product of his time, a man who would never have been able to accept that his wife was more successful than he was. The funeral was a modest affair, exactly as Thomas would have wanted. Patricia played the role of the grieving daughter-in-law beautifully, accepting condolences and making arrangements with the efficiency of someone already mentally calculating inheritance distributions. The reading of the will took place 1 week after the funeral. Thomas had left everything to me, as expected, with provisions for modest bequests to Marcus and the children. The estate was worth approximately $800,000, a comfortable sum that would allow me to maintain our lifestyle for the rest of my life, assuming I was careful with expenses. Patricia's disappointment was palpable but professionally concealed. She had clearly hoped that Thomas would leave Marcus a larger portion of the estate, possibly influenced by her years of suggestions about my inability to manage money responsibly. "Well, Eleanor," she said, after the lawyer had finished reading, "I suppose this means some significant changes for you." I nodded sadly, playing the part of the overwhelmed widow perfectly. "Have you given any thought to your future?" Marcus asked gently. He was genuinely concerned about my welfare, unlike his wife. "I suppose I'll have to find some way to support myself eventually," I replied. "The house is paid for, and Thomas left me comfortable for now. But money doesn't last forever. Patricia's eyes lit up with barely concealed satisfaction. That's very realistic of you, Eleanor. It's never too late to start a new career, even at your age. What kind of work do you think would be suitable? I asked innocently. Well, Patricia said, warming to her favorite topic, you're certainly experienced with housekeeping and cooking. I'm sure there are plenty of wealthy families who would appreciate someone with your skills. You could work as a housekeeper or cleaning lady. The work might be physically demanding, but you're still in good health. The other relatives nodded thoughtfully, as if Patricia was offering sage career counseling rather than delivering a calculated insult. There's actually quite good money in domestic work these days, Patricia continued, her voice dripping with false encouragement. You might even be able to afford a small apartment somewhere less expensive than this neighborhood. She gestured around Thomas's house, which I would inherit along with everything else, as if she were already calculating its sale value. Of course, you'd want to be careful not to take on too much too quickly, Marcus added, genuinely trying to be helpful. Maybe start with just a few hours a week until you get used to working again. I looked around at the assembled family members, all nodding sympathetically at my predicament. These people had known me for 3 decades, had eaten countless meals I had prepared, had accepted my help and support through their own difficulties, and now they were calmly discussing my future as a cleaning lady as if it were an inevitable consequence of my own limitations. That's very thoughtful advice, I said quietly. I suppose I'll have to learn to support myself for the first time in my adult life. Patricia practically glowed with satisfaction. She had spent 30 years trying to put me in my place, and now circumstance had finally done it for her. The family gathering dispersed shortly afterward, with various relatives offering their own versions of helpful suggestions for my new life of economic necessity. Patricia lingered longest, clearly savoring her moment of triumph. I know this is overwhelming, Eleanor, she said with mock sympathy. But you'll adapt. People are more resilient than they think. I'm sure you're right, I replied. I suppose we'll see what tomorrow brings. That night, alone in the house I had shared with Thomas for 31 years, I sat in his study and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of 3 decades of deception. I had loved Thomas genuinely, but I had never been able to share my true self with him. I had achieved extraordinary success, but I had been forced to hide it from everyone who mattered to me. But I had also been handed an opportunity for the most spectacular revelation of my life. The next morning, I woke early and dressed carefully in my most conservative widow's attire. I had breakfast, read the newspaper, and waited until exactly 9 o'clock before making the phone call that would change everything. Margaret, I said when my sister answered. It's time. Margaret had been waiting for this call for 30 years. She was the only person who knew the full truth about my double life, and she had agreed long ago to help me when the time came to reveal everything. Are you sure you're ready for this? She asked. Once you do this, there's no going back. I've never been more ready for anything in my life, I replied. Within an hour, Margaret had activated a plan we had refined over decades. Lawyers were contacted, documents were prepared, and arrangements were made for what would be the most shocking family meeting in our family's history. I spent the day making other necessary calls, each one bringing me closer to the moment of truth. By evening, everything was in place for what would happen the next day. I called Marcus at 7 o'clock, just as he was finishing dinner with his family. Marcus, dear, I said, would it be possible for you and Patricia to come by tomorrow morning? I need to discuss some important matters about my future, and I could use your advice. Of course, Eleanor, Marcus replied immediately. Is everything all right? Everything is fine, I assured him. I just need to make some decisions about what comes next, and I value your opinion. Patricia's voice was audible in the background, though I couldn't make out her words. Marcus covered the phone briefly before returning to our conversation. Patricia suggests we meet around 10 o'clock, if that works for you. She thinks it would be good to get started on planning your transition as soon as possible. 10 o'clock would be perfect, I agreed. And Marcus, would you mind asking Patricia to bring her legal expertise? I may need some professional guidance. I could practically hear Patricia's excitement through the phone. She undoubtedly believed I was going to ask for help navigating my new financial reality, possibly even requesting assistance finding employment. She'll be happy to help, Marcus confirmed. We'll see you tomorrow morning. That evening, I prepared for the next day with the same meticulous attention to detail that had served me so well in business. I laid out my clothing, organized my documents, and rehearsed exactly what I would say and when. I also spent time in Thomas's study, looking through his personal papers and remembering the man I had loved, despite our relationship being built on such a fundamental deception. He had been a good husband by the standards of his generation, and he had genuinely cared for my welfare. But he had also been a man who would never have been able to accept the truth about who I really was. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the universe itself was preparing for drama. I dressed in my usual conservative style, prepared coffee and pastries, and waited for my guests to arrive. Marcus and Patricia arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, with Patricia carrying a leather briefcase that suggested she was prepared for serious business. They settled in the living room, accepting coffee and expressing appropriate concern for my emotional state. "How are you holding up, Eleanor?" Marcus asked gently. "I know this must be an incredibly difficult adjustment." "I'm managing," I replied, "though you're both right that I need to start thinking practically about my future." Patricia leaned forward eagerly, her briefcase at the ready. "I've been giving this a lot of thought, Eleanor, and I really think domestic work could be perfect for you. You have all the right skills, and there's steady demand. I could even help you find positions with some of the better families in the area." "That's very generous of you," I said, "though I should probably mention that there might be some complications with that plan." "What kind of complications?" Marcus asked. I stood up and walked to Thomas's desk, retrieving a folder I had placed there earlier. "Well, it turns out there are some aspects of my financial situation that we haven't discussed yet." Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I may not need to work as a cleaning lady after all." I opened the folder and began distributing documents to both of them. The first set contained incorporation papers for Blackstone Innovations, showing Eleanor Blackstone as founder and CEO, with a photograph that was unmistakably me. Though taken in professional attire they had never seen. Patricia stared at the papers in confusion. "I don't understand. Who is Eleanor Blackstone?" "I am Eleanor Blackstone," I replied calmly. "I have been for 31 years. Marcus looked up from the documents, his face pale with shock. "Eleanor, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that for the past 3 decades, while you've all believed I was simply a housewife, I have actually been running one of the most successful technology consulting firms in the country." I distributed the second set of documents, which contained recent financial statements for Blackstone Innovations showing annual revenues in the hundreds of millions, along with portfolio statements for my various investment accounts. Patricia's face went through several color changes as she processed the numbers. "This can't be real. These numbers, they're saying you're worth approximately $1.2 billion. I finished for her. "Though the exact amount fluctuates with market conditions." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Marcus was the first to find his voice. "How is this possible? We've known you for 30 years. You're a housewife. You bake cookies and organize charity events." "I do bake cookies and organize charity events," I confirmed. "I also run a technology empire. Turns out it's possible to do both, though it requires careful time management." Patricia was staring at the financial documents as if they might disappear if she looked away. But how? When? We would have known." "Would you?" I asked gently. "Did any of you ever ask what I did with my time when Thomas was at work? Did anyone ever wonder how we maintained such a comfortable lifestyle on an accountant's salary? Did it ever occur to you to question whether the woman who managed your household finances so efficiently might have other financial skills?" The truth was sinking in slowly, and I could see the exact moment when Patricia realized the full implications of what I was telling them. "You mean all those times you acted like you didn't understand investments when Thomas was trying to teach you about money management?" "I was protecting his ego," I said simply. "Thomas was a good man, but he was a product of his generation. He could never have accepted being married to someone more successful than he was. So I made a choice to let him believe he was the provider and protector, while I quietly built an empire." Marcus was shaking his head in disbelief. "But the secrecy, the deception, how could you lie to us for so long?" "I didn't lie," I corrected gently. "I simply didn't share information that wasn't relevant to our family relationships. I was still the woman who loved your father, who attended your soccer games, who helped with your homework. The fact that I was also building a business empire didn't change any of that." Patricia had found her voice again, though it was somewhat strangled. "All those years you let us believe, all those comments I made about you needing to find work, About contributing to society. Yes, I said calmly. All those years you patronized me and suggested I was a burden on society, I was actually employing thousands of people and revolutionizing entire industries. Did you know that the customer management software your marketing firm uses? I developed that. The efficiency improvements at the hospital where little Sarah was born? My company designed those systems. I pulled out another document. This might interest you particularly, Patricia. Do you remember the Hendricks Corporation account that your firm spent 2 years trying to land? Patricia nodded weakly. They've been my client for 8 years. I've been very pleased with the relationship. The implications of this revelation seemed to hit Patricia like a physical blow. She had spent years demeaning me as a useless housewife, while I was actually the mysterious CEO her own career had been trying to impress. I don't understand, Marcus said, still struggling to process everything. If you're so wealthy, why did you live so modestly? Why didn't you tell Dad? Why didn't you help us more? I did help you, I pointed out. Your college tuition, your wedding, the down payment on your first house, the children's college funds. Where do you think that money really came from? Thomas's salary barely covered our basic living expenses. I showed them another set of documents detailing the various ways I had quietly funded their lives over the years, always in amounts small enough that Thomas could believe they came from careful savings or my modest craft earnings. As for why I lived modestly, I continued, I was married to a man I loved who needed to believe he was providing for his family. I could have bought mansions and yachts, but what would have been the point if it meant destroying my marriage? Patricia was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. So when you said yesterday that you'd have to see about finding work, I was giving you an opportunity to show your true character, I replied, and you didn't disappoint. Within hours of your father-in-law's funeral, you were gleefully planning my future as a cleaning lady, apparently believing that a woman who had managed a household efficiently for 3 decades would be incapable of managing anything else. The silence stretched on as they absorbed the magnitude of what I was telling them. Finally, Marcus asked the question I had been waiting for. What happens now? I smiled for the first time since their arrival. Now we discuss your futures. I distributed a final set of documents. Marcus, you've always been like a son to me, and I want to make sure you and the children are provided for. I'm establishing a trust fund that will ensure Sarah, David, and Daniel never have to worry about college tuition or their first homes. Marcus's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the numbers. Eleanor, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I replied. You've been a good son to me, even when your wife was encouraging you to see me as a burden. I turned to Patricia, who was still staring at the documents in shock. As for you, Patricia, I have a proposition. Patricia looked up warily. You've spent years suggesting that I should contribute more to society, I continued. I'm prepared to offer you a position with the Eleanor Blackstone Foundation, which manages my philanthropic activities. The foundation has an annual budget of $50 million, and it needs someone with legal expertise to help expand our charitable giving. Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you the opportunity to actually make a difference in the world, rather than just criticizing others for not doing so. The salary would be considerably more than you're making at your current firm, and the work would involve exactly the kind of meaningful contribution to society that you've always claimed to value. Patricia looked down at the offer letter I had prepared, her hands shaking slightly. I don't understand. After everything I've said, all the ways I've treated you, you treated me exactly the way I allowed you to treat me, I replied. I could have corrected your assumptions at any time, but I chose not to. You're ambitious and intelligent, Patricia. I've watched you for years, and underneath all that resentment and condescension, you actually have the skills to do important work. But why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you help me after? Because holding grudges is exhausting, I said simply, and because the world needs more people doing meaningful work, regardless of their past mistakes. Marcus was crying openly now. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. All those years we didn't appreciate. You appreciated exactly what I wanted you to appreciate, I assured him. I was genuinely happy being your stepmother and Thomas's wife. The business success was fulfilling, but it was never more important than our family relationships. Over the following weeks, the news of Eleanor Blackstone's true identity began to spread through our social circles. The reaction was everything I had anticipated and more. Some people were genuinely excited and impressed by the revelation. The women from my charity organizations suddenly saw me as an inspiration rather than simply a reliable volunteer. The neighbors, who had always been politely dismissive, began treating me with the kind of respect usually reserved for celebrities, but others reacted with suspicion and resentment. There were whispers about deception and manipulation, suggestions that I had somehow cheated by not revealing my success earlier. A few former friends seemed to take my hidden wealth as a personal insult, as if my failure to share the information had somehow diminished their own lives. The most interesting reactions came from Thomas's colleagues at the accounting firm. Several of them approached me with investment opportunities and business proposals, apparently forgetting that they had barely acknowledged my existence during 30 years of office parties and company events. Patricia took 3 weeks to decide whether to accept my job offer. During that time, she visited me twice, both times clearly struggling with the cognitive dissonance of everything she had believed about me. "I need to understand something," she said during her second visit. "Were you laughing at us all those years? When we were patronizing you and treating you like you didn't understand the world, were you secretly thinking we were fools?" It was a fair question, and I considered it carefully before answering. "No," I said finally. "I was never laughing at you. I was sometimes sad that you couldn't see past your own assumptions, but I was never contemptuous. You were reacting to the persona I had deliberately created. If anything, the fault was mine for maintaining such an elaborate deception. But it must have been frustrating," she pressed. "All those times I made comments about your contributing to society, when you were actually contributing more than any of us." "It was sometimes frustrating," I admitted, "but it was also my choice. I could have corrected you at any time, but I valued my marriage and my privacy more than I valued your good opinion." She accepted the position with the foundation, and I'm pleased to report that she's proven to be an excellent addition to our team. Her legal expertise has helped us expand our charitable giving significantly, and she's developed a genuine passion for philanthropic work that I find deeply satisfying to watch. Marcus has struggled more with the revelation than Patricia has. He's grateful for the financial security I've provided for his family, but he's also wrestling with guilt over the years he spent seeing me as dependent and somewhat pitiful. He's apologized repeatedly, though I've tried to help him understand that no apology is necessary. The children, now young adults, have adapted to their new reality with the resilience of youth. Sarah, who is studying business, has expressed interest in eventually working for one of my companies. The twins are in college, pursuing engineering degrees, and they seem to view their newly wealthy step-grandmother as an interesting puzzle rather than a source of guilt or confusion. As for me, I'm adjusting to life without the elaborate deceptions that defined my existence for 3 decades. I've sold Thomas's house and bought a beautiful estate that better reflects my actual financial status. I've also begun taking a more visible role in my company's operations, though I still value my privacy and have no interest in becoming a public figure. The loneliness that plagued me during my years of secrecy has largely disappeared. I'm building genuine relationships with people who know the truth about who I am, and I'm finding that authenticity is far more satisfying than the perfect facade I maintained for so long. But I don't regret the choices I made. Thomas lived his entire life believing he was a successful provider and protector, and he died happy and fulfilled. That was worth 30 years of hidden truth, and the business I built during those years has provided employment for thousands of people and generated innovations that have improved countless lives. Sometimes people ask me if I would do anything differently if I could go back and start over. It's a difficult question to answer. The deception was exhausting and sometimes painful, but it also allowed me to have both the love I wanted and the success I craved. In a different era, with a different husband, perhaps I could have been open about my ambitions from the beginning. But in the circumstances I faced, I made the best choices I could. The most unexpected consequence of my revelation has been the response from other women in similar situations. I've received hundreds of letters from women who have been hiding their own successes, their own ambitions, their own capabilities behind facades designed to protect fragile male egos or conform to social expectations. Some of these women are entrepreneurs running businesses their husbands don't know about. Others are investors who have built substantial portfolios while pretending to be financially naive. Still others are artists, writers, or inventors whose work is published or patented under pseudonyms to avoid family conflicts. I've started a support network for these women, providing both emotional support and practical advice for those who choose to reveal their true selves, and understanding for those who choose to maintain their secrets. There's no judgment in our group. We all understand the complex calculations that lead women to hide their lights under bushels. The foundation Patricia now helps me run has become a particular passion of mine. We focus on supporting women entrepreneurs, especially those who face family or cultural pressures to minimize their ambitions. We provide not just funding, but also mentorship and emotional support for women navigating the difficult balance between personal relationships and professional success. One of our most successful initiatives has been a scholarship program for women returning to school or starting businesses later in life. Too many women sacrifice their own dreams for their family's needs, and our program helps them reclaim those dreams when the time is right. I've also become involved in advocacy for women's financial literacy and independence. Too many women remain financially dependent throughout their lives, not because they lack the ability to understand money, but because they're never given the opportunity to develop and demonstrate that understanding. My story has been featured in several business publications, always with an emphasis on the importance of women's economic empowerment. I'm careful to present my experience not as a template for others to follow, but as an example of the complex choices women sometimes face in pursuit of both love and success. The technology industry has embraced me as something of an icon, particularly in discussions about women's underrepresentation in executive roles. I speak occasionally at conferences, though I'm selective about my appearances and always emphasize that my path was unusual and not necessarily advisable for others. My companies continue to thrive under more transparent leadership. It turns out that having a visible CEO, rather than a mysterious recluse, has actually improved our business relationships in many cases. Clients appreciate being able to meet with me directly, and my employees are energized by working for someone they can actually interact with. I've also begun acquiring additional businesses, particularly those founded by women entrepreneurs who need capital and mentorship to scale their operations. It's deeply satisfying to provide other women with the resources I had to accumulate in secret. The house I bought after selling Thomas's modest home has become a gathering place for successful women from various industries. We meet monthly to discuss business opportunities, share resources, and provide mutual support. Many of these women have their own stories of hidden successes or constrained ambitions, and our conversations are both enlightening and therapeutic. Patricia has become one of my closest advisors, which would have been unimaginable just a year ago. Her legal expertise has proven invaluable in structuring our charitable initiatives, and her former resentment has transformed into genuine admiration and friendship. She often tells people that working with me has been the most meaningful experience of her career, and I believe her sincerity. The transformation in our relationship has been remarkable to witness. Where once she saw weakness and dependence, she now recognizes the incredible strength it took to maintain my double life for 3 decades. Where once she dismissed my contributions as meaningless domestic tasks, she now understands the sophisticated skills required to manage both a household and a business empire simultaneously. Marcus has taken longer to adjust, but he's gradually coming to terms with the reality of who his stepmother really is. He started bringing the children to visit more often, and I can see that he's genuinely proud to be part of my family now, rather than seeing me as an obligation inherited from his father. The children have been endlessly curious about my business operations. Sarah, in particular, has shown remarkable aptitude for understanding complex financial structures. She spent several afternoons with me going through the portfolio management systems I developed, and I wouldn't be surprised if she chooses to join one of my companies after graduation. David and Daniel, the twins, have inherited their grandfather's analytical mind, but with a modern understanding of technology that sometimes surpasses even mine. They've proposed several improvements to our software systems that my development team is currently implementing. 6 months after my revelation, I received an unexpected visitor. Margaret arrived unannounced one afternoon, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing the biggest smile I'd seen from her in years. "I've been waiting 30 years to have this conversation," she said, pulling me into a fierce hug. "Do you have any idea how difficult it's been keeping your secret all this time?" We spent the entire afternoon reminiscing about the elaborate systems we'd developed to maintain my anonymity. Margaret had been my lifeline to the outside world, handling mail forwarding, creating alibis for my business trips, and even attending corporate events as my representative when Eleanor Blackstone needed to be seen but couldn't risk being recognized. There were so many times I wanted to tell Patricia exactly who she was dealing with, Margaret confessed, especially during that anniversary party when she gave that speech about your needing to find ways to contribute. I'm glad you didn't, I replied. The revelation needed to come from me, and it needed to happen at the right time. Margaret had brought photo albums documenting my secret life over the decades. Pictures of me at business conferences, receiving awards, meeting with world leaders and industry titans. It was surreal seeing this visual record of the life I'd lived in parallel to my domestic existence. Look at this one, Margaret said, pointing to a photograph of me shaking hands with a former president at an economic summit. This was taken the same week you hosted that charity luncheon, where Patricia spent the entire time lecturing you about women needing to be more ambitious. We laughed until we cried, not from cruelty, but from the sheer absurdity of the situations I'd navigated for so many years. The business world has gradually adjusted to Eleanor Blackstone having a face and a history. Initially, there was considerable curiosity and some skepticism about my decades of anonymity. Several investigative journalists tried to uncover evidence of deception or fraud in my business practices, but their research only confirmed that Blackstone Innovations had always operated with the highest ethical standards. A few competitors attempted to challenge some of my long-standing contracts, suggesting that my clients had been deceived about who they were actually working with. However, my work had always spoken for itself, and every client who was approached chose to renew their agreements with my company. The most gratifying response came from my employees. Many of them had worked for Eleanor Blackstone for years without ever meeting me in person, communicating only through encrypted video calls and written correspondence. When I finally revealed myself, they were amazed to discover that their reclusive CEO was a woman in her 70s who had been running a global empire from her basement office. Several of my senior executives have since told me that learning about my double life actually increased their respect for the company. They recognized that building such a successful business while maintaining complete secrecy required extraordinary discipline and strategic thinking. I've been invited to speak at numerous conferences about entrepreneurship, women's leadership, and work-life balance. My talks always focus on the importance of finding authentic ways to pursue success, rather than suggesting that others should follow my path of deception. I don't recommend lying to your family for 30 years. I always begin these presentations, but I do recommend refusing to let other people's limitations define your possibilities. The audiences are usually fascinated by the practical aspects of maintaining my double life. How did I manage meetings during school events? How did I handle international business calls during family dinners? How did I keep track of which identity I was supposed to be using at any given moment? The answers involve systems and disciplines that most people find exhausting just to contemplate. But for me, the complexity was energizing rather than draining. I genuinely enjoyed the intellectual challenge of managing multiple identities and keeping all the moving pieces in perfect coordination. One of the most frequent questions I receive is whether I ever regretted the deception. The answer is complicated. I regret that Thomas never knew who I really was, and I regret that our relationship was built on such a fundamental withholding of truth. But I don't regret the choices I made, given the circumstances I faced. Thomas was a good man, but he was also a product of his generation and his upbringing. He genuinely believed that a man's worth was measured by his ability to provide for his family, and that a woman's fulfillment should come primarily from supporting that provision. Had I revealed my business success early in our marriage, it would have destroyed something essential in his sense of himself. Was it fair for me to make that choice for him? Was I being protective or patronizing? These are questions I continue to wrestle with, and I'm not sure there are clear answers. What I do know is that Thomas lived a happy, fulfilled life, believing he was a successful provider and protector. He died proud of the life we had built together, grateful for what he saw as my contentment with our modest lifestyle. That happiness was real, even if it was based on incomplete information. The children have provided some of the most honest feedback about my choices. Sarah, who is now 22 and about to graduate from business school, has been particularly thoughtful in her analysis. "I understand why you did it," she told me during one of our recent conversations, "and I'm grateful for all the ways you helped our family without us knowing. But I also think it's sad that you felt like you had to hide such an important part of yourself." She's right, of course. It was sad. There were countless moments over the years when I wanted to share my excitement about a successful deal, my pride in an innovative solution, my satisfaction in building something meaningful. Instead, I had to celebrate these victories in solitude, or share them only with Margaret during our carefully coded phone conversations. But Sarah has also helped me understand that my story has value precisely because it illustrates the constraints that women of my generation faced. Her generation has different challenges, but they also have different opportunities to be authentic about their ambitions. You paved the way for women like me to be open about wanting both love and success, she pointed out. Your sacrifice made it easier for us to refuse to choose between the two. This perspective has become central to my philanthropic work. The Eleanor Blackstone Foundation now focuses heavily on supporting young women who are pursuing ambitious careers while also seeking meaningful personal relationships. We provide mentorship, financial support, and practical resources to help them navigate these competing demands without having to choose between them. We've also developed programs specifically for women in their 40s and 50s who want to restart careers they abandoned for family responsibilities. Too many brilliant women have spent decades sublimating their professional ambitions, and we're working to help them reclaim those dreams when the timing is right. One of our most successful initiatives has been a business incubator specifically for women over 50. The program provides not just funding and mentorship, but also emotional support for women who doubt their ability to succeed in the business world after years away from it. The participants in this program often remind me of myself in the early days of Blackstone Innovations. They're hungry for success, disciplined in their approach, and remarkably creative in finding solutions to complex problems. Many of them have skills and perspectives that younger entrepreneurs lack, and they're often more realistic about the challenges of building sustainable businesses. I've personally mentored several women through this program, and their successes have been among the most rewarding experiences of my entire career. Watching a 60-year-old grandmother transform her hobby into a million-dollar business, or seeing a 55-year-old divorcee build a consulting firm that rivals established competitors, reminds me why I fell in love with entrepreneurship in the first place. The technology industry has also benefited from my emergence from anonymity. I've been able to take a more active role in promoting women's participation in STEM fields, and my companies have become known for their commitment to gender equity in hiring and promotion. We've implemented policies that I wish had existed when I was starting my career. Flexible work arrangements that accommodate family responsibilities, mentorship programs that pair experienced executives with rising talent, and compensation structures that eliminate gender-based pay gaps. My personal story has become a recruiting tool for attracting talented women who might otherwise avoid the technology sector. We regularly receive applications from women who say they were inspired by the idea of working for someone who understands the challenges of balancing professional ambition with personal relationships. The business itself continues to evolve and grow. We've expanded into new markets, developed cutting-edge products, and acquired several smaller companies with innovative technologies. The transition from anonymous leadership to public visibility has actually accelerated our growth, as clients and partners appreciate being able to work directly with our CEO. I've also begun planning for succession, recognizing that I won't be able to run these companies forever. This process has been both challenging and rewarding, as I work to identify and develop the next generation of leaders who can carry forward the values and vision that built Blackstone Innovations. Several of the women I've mentored over the years are now being considered for senior executive positions within my companies. It's deeply satisfying to know that the empire I built in secret will eventually be led by women who never had to hide their ambitions or apologize for their success. The personal relationships in my life have continued to evolve as well. Patricia and I have developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared professional interests. She often jokes that she's grateful I didn't reveal my wealth earlier, because it forced her to develop her own career rather than relying on family connections. Marcus has become one of my most trusted advisors, bringing a perspective that combines family loyalty with business acumen. He's helped me navigate some of the more complex emotional aspects of managing wealth while maintaining family relationships. The grandchildren have adapted to their new reality with remarkable grace. They understand that their step-grandmother is wealthy and successful, but they also know that her love for them has nothing to do with money. I'm careful to maintain the same boundaries I established during their childhood, providing opportunities and experiences rather than simply throwing money at every situation. Sarah has started working part-time for one of my smaller companies while finishing her degree. She's shown impressive instincts for strategic thinking and has already contributed several valuable ideas to our product development process. I'm cautiously optimistic that she might choose to join the family business permanently after graduation. The twins have taken different paths but remain equally engaged with my work. David is studying mechanical engineering and has expressed interest in our manufacturing operations. Daniel is pursuing computer science and has already developed several apps that we're considering for commercial development. Looking back on the past year since my revelation, I'm struck by how much my life has changed while also remaining fundamentally the same. I'm still the woman who loves cooking elaborate dinners, who remembers everyone's birthdays, who worries about my family's happiness and health. But I'm also finally able to be open about the work that has defined so much of my adult life. The integration of my two identities has been surprisingly smooth. I no longer have to maintain elaborate schedules to keep my business and personal lives separate. I can take phone calls during family gatherings, discuss my work at social events, and invite business associates to my home without fear of exposure. This transparency has improved my effectiveness as a CEO in ways I didn't anticipate. My decision-making is more confident because I no longer have to consider how each choice might affect my cover story. My relationships with employees and partners are more authentic because they're based on complete information rather than carefully constructed facades. But perhaps the most significant change has been the disappearance of the loneliness that plagued me for so many years. I no longer have to celebrate victories in solitude or bear the weight of difficult decisions alone. I have a community of people who know and appreciate both aspects of my life, and that support has been transformative. I've started writing a book about my experiences, though I'm still deciding how much detail to include. The story has obvious commercial appeal, but I'm more interested in providing guidance for other women who might be facing similar choices between authenticity and relationships, between personal ambition and family harmony. The working title is The Secret CEO: Lessons in Leading a Double Life. Though my editor thinks it should be something more inspirational, I'm resistant to presenting my story as purely uplifting, because the truth is more complicated than that. There were real costs to my choices, real sacrifices that affected real people, but there were also real benefits, and I think those deserve recognition too. The business I built has employed thousands of people, generated innovations that have improved countless lives, and created wealth that I'm now able to use for philanthropic purposes. The family I nurtured produced children who grew up feeling loved and secure, even if they didn't understand the source of that security. The book project has forced me to reflect more deeply on the broader implications of my story. How many other women are living similar double lives? How many brilliant minds are being wasted because society still struggles to accept ambitious women? How many families are missing out on the benefits of women's full economic participation because of outdated assumptions about gender roles? These questions have become central to my advocacy work. I speak regularly about the need for structural changes that would make my story unnecessary. Family leave policies that don't penalize career advancement, workplace cultures that value results over face time, social attitudes that celebrate rather than punish women's success. I've also become involved in research on women's entrepreneurship, funding studies that examine the barriers women face in starting and scaling businesses. The data is both encouraging and sobering. Women are starting businesses at record rates, but they still face significant challenges in accessing capital and achieving the same levels of growth as their male counterparts. My foundation has launched an initiative to address these disparities through direct investment, mentorship, and advocacy for policy changes. We're working with other organizations to create a more supportive ecosystem for women entrepreneurs, recognizing that individual success stories like mine are less important than systemic change. The technology sector has been particularly responsive to these efforts. Many of the industry's leading companies have implemented new policies and programs designed to support women's advancement, and several have asked me to serve on their boards or advisory committees. I'm selective about these opportunities, preferring to work with organizations that demonstrate genuine commitment to change rather than those seeking to improve their public image. But when I do find companies with authentic dedication to gender equity, I'm eager to contribute my experience and resources to their efforts. One of the most rewarding aspects of my current life is the opportunity to be a visible role model for younger women. I receive dozens of letters each week from women who say my story has inspired them to pursue their own ambitious goals or to be more open about their existing achievements. Some of these women are in situations similar to mine, hiding successful businesses or investment portfolios from husbands who couldn't handle the reality of their wives' financial independence. I always counsel these women to consider whether the deception is truly necessary, while also respecting their judgment about their own circumstances. Others are young women just starting their careers who want advice on how to navigate workplace challenges or balance professional and personal goals. These conversations remind me of how much has changed since I started my career and how much work remains to be done. The most difficult letters come from women who feel trapped by family obligations or social expectations, who have given up their own dreams to support others' ambitions. I try to provide both practical advice and emotional support, while also connecting them with resources that might help them reclaim their professional identities. These interactions have convinced me that my story has value not as a template for others to follow, but as an example of what's possible when women refuse to accept limitations imposed by others. Every woman who reads about my experience and decides to pursue her own ambitions openly and authentically makes my decades of secrecy worthwhile. As I look toward the future, I'm optimistic about the possibilities for the next generation of women. Sarah and her peers face different challenges than I did, but they also have different opportunities to define success on their own terms. They're growing up in a world where women CEOs are still rare, but no longer shocking, where work-life integration is becoming more accepted than work-life balance, where success can be measured in multiple ways rather than just financial achievement. But they're also inheriting problems that my generation created or failed to solve: persistent pay gaps, inadequate family support systems, workplace cultures that still favor traditionally masculine approaches to leadership. My goal for the remaining years of my career is to help address these structural issues while also supporting individual women who are navigating them. The combination of philanthropic work, business leadership, and advocacy feels like the natural evolution of the path I started 31 years ago in my basement office. I'm also committed to ensuring that my own companies serve as models for the kind of workplace culture that supports all employees, regardless of gender, race, or family status. We've implemented policies that I wish had existed when I was juggling my double life: unlimited family leave, flexible work arrangements, mentorship programs, and leadership development opportunities specifically designed for underrepresented groups. The response from our employees has been overwhelmingly positive, and we've seen improvements in both retention and performance across all demographics. But more importantly, we've created an environment where no one has to choose between professional success and personal authenticity. That's ultimately what I want my legacy to be. Not the story of a woman who built a business empire in secret, but the story of someone who helped create a world where such secrecy is no longer necessary. The past year has taught me that truth, even when revealed late, has its own power to heal and transform. My family relationships are stronger now than they ever were when they were based on partial information. My business relationships are more productive now that they're based on complete transparency. My personal sense of identity is more integrated now that I no longer have to maintain separate versions of myself for different audiences. If I could go back and change the past, would I choose to be open about my ambitions from the beginning? It's impossible to know. The world 30 years ago was different. My marriage was different, and the choices available to me were different. but I can help ensure that the women who come after me have better choices, more support, and fewer reasons to hide their lights under bushels. That feels like a worthy way to spend whatever years I have remaining. And so, at 73, I find myself embarking on what feels like a new chapter of my life, one defined by authenticity rather than deception, by community rather than isolation, by the possibility of being fully myself in all aspects of my existence. It's been quite a journey from that morning, 31 years ago, when I first walked down to my basement office and began building Eleanor Blackstone's empire. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about this whole experience is that it's not really ending. It's just finally beginning to be told openly, honestly, and without apology. The woman who once pretended to be just a housewife is now proud to be known as CEO Eleanor Blackstone. And Eleanor Blackstone, it turns out, is exactly who Eleanor Hayes was meant to be all along.